What if I told you the 1930s weren't just about gangster flicks and screwball comedies? Hidden beneath the glitz of Fred Astaire and the shadows of Great Depression, struggles lie films that defied the era, challenged norms, and vanished into obscurity. These 15 forgotten masterpieces were bold, heartbreaking, and years ahead of their time. Some were buried by the studios, others lost in censorship or political agendas. But today, we're unearthing them. For the first time in decades. Let's begin. He Sin of Norah Moran, 1933. Before Memento, before Pulp Fiction, there was The Sin of Norah Moran, a film so ahead of its time, it practically time-traveled into obscurity. Directed by Phil Goldstone, this haunting drama uses a non-linear narrative decades before it became a cinematic trend. The story follows Norah, a young woman sentenced to death for a crime she didn't commit. But here's the twist. She doesn't try to save herself. The film unfolds in fractured memories and surreal flashbacks, pulling us deeper into Norah's tragic psyche. We see her fall in love, get manipulated by a corrupt politician, and ultimately sacrifice herself to protect someone she loves. Zita Johann, fresh from The Mummy, 1932, delivers a raw, unnerving performance that rivals any modern-day psychological role. But why did it disappear? Two reasons. Its structure confused Depression-era audiences, and its morality play was too ambiguous for the Hays Code enforcers. The idea that a woman would knowingly accept execution without redemption or salvation shook the censors. They didn't like stories without clear heroes and villains. So, it was quietly buried. The original poster, a surreal painting of Norah lying in a fetal position, floating against a black void, is now more famous than the film itself. But if you watch it today, its visual ambition and fractured emotional storytelling feel shockingly modern. Heroes for Sale, 1933. Directed by the uncompromising William A. Wellman, Heroes for Sale is not just a movie, it's a punch to the gut. This Depression-era social critique tells the story of Tom Holmes, a World War I veteran who becomes addicted to morphine, gets fired for being a troublemaker, and is constantly punished for doing the right thing. The film moves at breakneck pace, jumping from battlefield trauma to post-war unemployment, from soup kitchens to radical political uprisings. And through it all, Richard Barthelmess delivers a painfully stoic performance that reflects millions of Americans who were just trying to survive. So, why is this film so hidden? It was too real. While other studios pushed escapism, Heroes for Sale rubbed America's wounds raw. It portrayed banks as predators, corporations as tyrants, and society as a system that punishes virtue. The ending doesn't bring justice. It brings quiet resignation. That terrified the gatekeepers. What's remarkable is that this film got made at all. Warner Brothers gave Wellman a brief window before the Hays Code clamped down in mid-1934. And in that window, he made a film that screamed truth to power. Today, Heroes for Sale feels like a time capsule of broken dreams and relentless hope. It deserves far more recognition than it ever got. Mad Love, 1935. Before Peter Lorre was the voice of cartoon villains, or the twitchy sidekick in noir thrillers, he delivered a performance in Mad Love that chilled even hardened audiences. Directed by Karl Freund, this gothic horror gem blends surgical obsession, romantic delusion, and Frankenstein-like body horror. Lore plays Dr. Gogol, a brilliant surgeon in love with a stage actress who doesn't love him back. When her pianist husband's hands are crushed in a train accident, Gogol performs a grotesque operation, replacing them with the hands of a recently executed murderer. The result? A macabre psychological spiral where love becomes madness and genius turns monstrous. This was Lorre's first American film, and he's terrifying. Soft-spoken, childlike, and menacing all at once. Freund, who was the cinematographer on Dracula, 1931, directs with shadows and extreme close-ups that make your skin crawl. But Mad Love was too twisted for 1935. Critics were disturbed, audiences confused, and the box office weak. It didn't fit neatly into the horror trend of the time. No monsters, no redemption, just obsession and tragedy. It was quietly pulled from circulation and largely forgotten. Today it stands as one of the most emotionally disturbing horror films of its era and a showcase of Peter Lorre's haunting brilliance. Blood Money, 1933. Few films from the 1930s dared to be as seductive and sleazy as Blood Money. Directed by Roland Brown, this pre-code gem follows Bill Bailey, a corrupt bail bondsman tangled in a web of criminals, gamblers, and a dangerously masochistic society girl. The film is laced with taboo topics, kinky desires, female criminality, and a stark rejection of conventional morality. Frances D. delivers a jaw-dropping performance as Elaine Talbert, a thrill-seeker who begs to be spanked and worships the criminal underworld. And this was in 1933. The film gleefully undermines law and order, portraying the justice system as a tool for personal profit, and women as just as capable and depraved as men. So, why haven't you heard of it? Because it scared the censors to death. Blood Money was one of the films that triggered the full enforcement of the production code in 1934. It was yanked from circulation, its prints scattered or lost. For decades, it became an underground legend. But those who've seen it call it a fever dream of 1930s decadence. Its dialogue is razor-sharp, its pacing electric, and its characters unforgettable. Blood Money showed that beneath the tuxedos and gin joints, Hollywood was ready to talk about the raw, messy truth, until someone told them not to. Man's Castle, 1933. Imagine a love story set in a shantytown, wrapped in cigarette smoke, hunger, and dreams of escape. Man's Castle, directed by Frank Borzage, is one of the most tender and tragic romances you've never seen. Spencer Tracy plays Bill, a drifter with charm and swagger, and Loretta Young is Trina, a young woman down on her luck. They meet in a park. He feeds her dinner. She follows him home to a shack built from tin and planks and stays. What unfolds is a fragile relationship held together by promises neither can keep. Bill wants freedom. Trina wants security. And in the middle is the world of the Great Depression, crushing everyone's hopes. It's a movie of stolen kisses, empty stomachs, and hard choices. Spencer Tracy brings a complexity to Bill, equal parts knight and coward, while Loretta Young glows with heartbreaking innocence. Borzage shoots the slum with elegance, making garbage cans and torn curtains look poetic. So, why is this film nearly forgotten? When the production code kicked in, it was shelved due to its unmarried lovers, subtle nudity, and raw depiction of poverty. Worse, it didn't fit any genre mold, too tragic for romance, too soft for social drama. Restored only in recent decades, Man's Castle reveals the quiet desperation of those living on the margins. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and that's why it hits so deep. The Power and the Glory, 1933. Years before Citizen Kane revolutionized storytelling, The Power and the Glory laid the blueprint. Directed by William K. Howard and written by Preston Sturges, this film tells the rise and fall of a railroad tycoon named Tom Garner through a fractured, non-linear structure that was unheard of at the time. We don't meet Tom through his triumphs, we meet him through his obituary. Then we rewind through flashbacks narrated by a loyal friend, piecing together a life of ambition, betrayal, and tragic misunderstanding. It's rich in theme, capitalism, loneliness, legacy, and Charles Farrell gives a soul-stirring performance as a man both admired and cursed. But the film was overshadowed, and fast. It came and went without fanfare, its experimental format too confusing for 1933 audiences. The studio barely marketed it, and it faded into obscurity. When Citizen Kane arrived in 1941, it was hailed as a revolution, but Kane owed a silent debt to The Power and the Glory. Today, film scholars call it the lost father of narrative innovation. And while Sturges later gained fame for his comedies, this film showed he could also cut straight to the heart of human complexity. Watching it now feels like discovering a missing chapter in cinema's evolution. Employee's Entrance, 1933. Some films show the dark side of power. Employee's Entrance drags it into the spotlight and strips it bare. Warren Williams stars as Kurt Anderson, a ruthless department store executive who destroys lives with a smirk. He sexually exploits his employees, fires workers without flinching, and preaches profit over people. And yet, he's magnetic. That's what makes this film so chilling. Anderson isn't a monster in a mask. He's capitalism in a three-piece suit. The film's heroine, played by Loretta Young, is a clerk who becomes a pawn in Anderson's games. Her descent into despair is gut-wrenching, and Young, just 20 years old, gives a performance full of terror, strength, and fragile humanity. Employee's entrance was shocking even in 1933. It criticized the American dream, showed predatory behavior without punishment, and hinted at suicide, mental breakdowns, and workplace abuse. Once the Hays Code took full effect, it was one of the first films to be buried. Why it matters today? Because it predicted everything we'd later see in corporate dramas. Wall Street, Glengarry Glen Ross, Succession. It's not just a hidden gem, it's a mirror held up to power, and it still cuts like a knife. Men in White, 1934. Before Grey's Anatomy made surgeons sexy, Men in White pulled back the curtain on hospital life, and did it with raw emotional weight. Clark Gable plays Dr. George Ferguson, a rising star in a busy New York hospital, torn between love and duty. But it's not just another medical drama. What makes this film unforgettable is its under-the-radar plotline. A nurse suffers complications from an implied abortion. A storyline so taboo, the censors practically went blind with rage. Yet the film treats her not as a sinner, but as a victim of circumstance and societal pressure. MGM tried to water it down for the censors, but the subtext remained loud and clear. Gable's performance carries a moral torment that burns through the screen. He's a man trying to save lives in a system that's bleeding compassion dry. The censors slashed it. Critics were divided. It became one of the first casualties of the production code. But beneath the surface lies a bold, unflinching moral drama years ahead of its time. Gabriel over the White House, 1933. This might be the most bizarre political fantasy ever made in Hollywood. Gabriel. Over the White House tells the story of a U.S. president who, after a car accident, starts hearing voices, possibly from God, and transforms into a benevolent dictator. He dissolves Congress, executes gangsters without trial, and rules by divine authority. Sounds terrifying? That's the point. Backed by William Randolph Hearst and released during the peak of the Great Depression, this film flirts with fascism as a form of salvation. It asks, what if a strong man really could fix everything? The fact that it was released just as Hitler was rising in Europe adds a disturbing layer of historical context. It was quickly buried. The U.S. government wasn't thrilled, critics were baffled, and audiences weren't sure if it was satire or prophecy. Today it feels like a forgotten Black Mirror, showing us the dark side of desperation for leadership. Zoo in Budapest, 1933. Part fairy tale, part fugitive romance. Zoo in Budapest is a strange, beautiful film that feels like it was whispered into existence. Gene Raymond plays a lonely zookeeper who lives in harmony with animals. Loretta Young is a runaway orphan facing life in a cruel institution. Together, they find refuge inside the gates of the Budapest Zoo, just for one surreal night. The film uses real animals, bears, lions, elephants, and shoots them with dreamlike wonder. There's barely a traditional plot. Instead, the film flows like poetry, full of moonlit chases, tender glances, and whispered promises. So, why did it vanish? It was too strange, too tender, and too silent-hearted for mainstream America. It didn't fit any box, not romance, not adventure, not drama. It just existed, and then disappeared. But for those lucky enough to see it, Zoo in Budapest is unforgettable. It's a film about finding love in the most unexpected sanctuary and losing it at dawn. Night Must Fall, 1937. When Robert Montgomery accepted the role of Danny in Night Must Fall, audiences expected a suave leading man. What they got instead was a chilling descent into the mind of a manipulative killer, a performance so unsettling it redefined Montgomery's career. Directed by Richard Thorpe and adapted from Emlyn Williams' play, this psychological thriller doesn't rely on jump scares or body counts. It lets evil creep in, politely. Set in a quiet English countryside home, the film centers around an invalid old woman, her suspicious niece, and the charming, mysterious stranger they allow into their lives. Danny wins their trust with smiles and flattery, but his eyes betray a growing mania. The tension builds slowly, unbearably, as we watch Danny's lies escalate and realize he may be capable of murder. Montgomery is mesmerizing. His transformation from affable to terrifying happens not through violence, but through monologue, silence, and eerie stillness. At a time when horror was dominated by supernatural creatures, Night Must Fall offered something more terrifying. The idea that evil could look you in the eye, smile, and bring you tea. Critics praised it, even earning Montgomery an Oscar nomination, but audiences weren't ready. The pacing was too slow, the atmosphere too heavy, the ending too ambiguous. It didn't offer the clear-cut morality they craved. The film quietly faded, remembered only by thriller aficionados and actors who studied Montgomery's performance as a masterclass in restraint. Today, it stands as a pioneering work of psychological suspense, decades before Psycho or Cape Fear. It asks an uncomfortable question. What if the nicest person in the room is the most dangerous? The Mayor of Hell, 1933. At first glance, The Mayor of Hell looks like a James Cagney vehicle designed for gangster fans. But scratch the surface and you'll find one of the boldest social commentaries of the decade, an expose on juvenile justice that still stings today. Cagney plays Patsy Gargan, a reformed gangster appointed as deputy commissioner of a corrupt boys' reformatory. What begins as a political stunt turns into something far more radical, a man trying to change a broken system from within. The reformatory is a Dickensian nightmare. Kids are beaten, starved, and humiliated by Warden Thompson, played with venomous precision by Dudley Digges. When Cagney's Gargan witnesses the cruelty firsthand, he sides with the boys, implementing a system of self-governance and hope. For a brief moment, it works. The boys thrive, the place blooms. But corruption doesn't go quietly. The warden fights back. Gargan's past catches up, and the hopeful experiment collapses into tragedy. What makes The Mayor of Hell unforgettable isn't just the message, it's the way it was made. Warner Brothers cast actual street kids, many with real reform school experience, and gave them gritty, unscripted moments. There's a rawness here that no studio polish can replicate. But that same realism made it a target. The Hays Code enforcers hated it. Critics feared its message of youth uprising. It was pulled from circulation, remade into a watered-down version in the 40s, and nearly erased from film history. Watching it today, it's impossible not to see echoes of modern juvenile justice debates. The Mayor of Hell doesn't just entertain, it demands a response. Laughter in Hell, 1933. Few films from the 1930s hit as hard, and disappeared as completely, as Laughter in Hell. Directed by Edward L. Kahn and starring Pat O'Brien, it tells the harrowing story of a railroad worker named Barney who murders his unfaithful wife and her lover in a fit of rage and ends up on a southern chain gang. But this isn't a redemption arc. It's a portrait of systemic cruelty and slow destruction. The chain gang scenes are relentless. Inmates are beaten, overworked, dehumanized. There's no nobility in suffering here, only exhaustion and despair. One scene shocked even 1930s audiences. A double lynching of black inmates, shown with horrifying realism. It's believed to be the first time such violence was portrayed on screen, without romanticizing or sugarcoating it. The film was pulled from many theaters within weeks of release. Southern states banned it outright. Critics who saw it were stunned by its darkness, but unsure what to make of it. It wasn't entertaining in the traditional sense. It wasn't heroic. It was just honest. And that made it dangerous. For decades, Laughter in Hell was considered lost. Only one known print resurfaced in the 2000s. Even now, it's rarely screened, but its legacy lingers. Before Cool Hand Luke, before Brubaker, Laughter in Hell asked the terrifying question. What happens when the system doesn't want to rehabilitate you, but erase you? Three Comrades, 1938. Three Comrades might be the most poetic tragedy to come out of the 1930s. Set in post-World War I Germany, it's not about bullets or bombs. It's about wounds you can't see. Based on a novel by All Quiet on the Western Front author Erich Maria Remarque and co-written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, it tells the story of three war veterans, played by Robert Taylor, Franchot Tone, and Robert Young, who open a car garage and try to rebuild their lives in a crumbling society. Then they meet Patricia, played by Margaret Sullivan in one of her most devastating performances. She's luminous, full of life and hope, even as we slowly learn she's dying of tuberculosis. Her romance with Taylor's character is tender, funny, and deeply tragic. The film becomes a meditation on friendship, political decay, and the fragility of happiness. It's beautifully shot, with moments of aching stillness. When Patricia coughs blood onto a white handkerchief, it feels like the end of the world in one gesture. Three Comrades was released quietly and never gained the fame of other anti-war films. Perhaps because it wasn't about war, it was about what comes after. It didn't end with victory or defeat, but with grief and remembrance. For anyone who's ever loved and lost, this film is a quiet, personal war. A Man to Remember, 1938. You've likely never heard of A Man to Remember, and that's a tragedy. Because this low-budget drama, shot in under 2 weeks, might just be the emotional high point of 1930s cinema. Directed by Garson Kanin and produced by Republic Pictures, it follows the life of Dr. John Abbott, a small-town physician who lives simply, charges little, and puts everyone else first. When he dies, the town's leaders gather, remembering him as a nuisance. But as his story unfolds in flashbacks, we learn he quietly held the town together for decades. He treated the poor for free. He stood up to corruption. He delivered babies, nursed epidemics, and defended the defenseless while barely making ends meet. The town saw a crank. We see a saint. What's devastating is how invisible he was in life and how irreplaceable he becomes in death. The final scene, where a child he once saved places a flower on his grave, hits with the weight of 1,000 monologues. Why did it vanish? Republic Pictures went through legal upheaval, and the film was considered lost until a print surfaced in the Netherlands. It's rarely screened today, but those who see it never forget. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it's unforgettable. Because in a world obsessed with noise, A Man to Remember whispers the truth. Sometimes, the quietest lives leave the loudest echoes. 15 forgotten gems. 15 glimpses into a braver, more experimental era of filmmaking, where risk was currency and truth often cost too much. These films dared to break rules, explore taboos, and tell stories no one else would. And then, they were buried, but not anymore. Drop a comment with your favorite rediscovery. Hit like if these stories moved you, and subscribe for more forgotten legends from Hollywood's hidden vault.